Hey everyone, it's another one of those days where I was able to get up a little extra early, so I thought I would tell more about my stuff I've been wanting to share out, and I really hope I get this done soon. I just feel like there's so many little things that go into it. I have to think about it because I feel like I forget stuff sometimes, so I think it's kind of fun to reflect on now that it's like way back in hindsight and everything. And again, like I kind of get a lot of negative feedback when I talk about this stuff, like something's wrong with you, you might need professional help. Well, that's exactly why I'm doing these videos and sharing this experiences, because I feel like I'm very well aware that people see me that way, and that's why I feel like I need to explain myself. And a lot of people say, oh, you don't need to explain yourself. I'm like, well, I really enjoy explaining myself, and I feel like if you understood exactly what has been happening to me, and you realize if the same thing happened to you, you'd kind of fall into the same trap. But at the same time, it's really interesting because I think I'm dealing with a little bit of paranormal stuff, like kind of crossing over into like a parallel dimensional timeline where I thought I had this old friend named Billy and stuff like that. So today I want to talk about a little bit of the confusion where, like, in the very first leg of my journey, I didn't realize it was happening at all. I thought Billy was a real person, and I thought everyone in my family knew who he was. In fact, my dad used to have his little jokes like Really Bob Billy and Buckshot Billy Bumstead, and it was funny. I was just thinking about that and how I wanted to give this talk, and the song came to mind. It goes, really Bob Bill, really Bob Billy, really Bob Bill, really Bob Bill. Like, nobody's ever sung that to me, but that's the kind of stuff my dad comes up with. He'll make up stuff like that off the top of his head because he's watched, like, he's one of these people that were growing up when television was coming out. And there's a lot of hokey, silly stuff that was on TV, and so a lot of his humor comes from that. So he kept saying something like really Bob Billy or Buckshot Billy Bumstead. So I really don't know where that comes from, but I always thought he was making a reference to Billy. I thought he was reminding me of my old boyfriend. And so later on when I asked him about it, I haven't heard any of those jokes from him ever since. Now I feel like he doesn't want to make those jokes because he doesn't want to encourage it, right? So that part of the trip, I didn't know was happening. Then when I was about 18, I'm like, okay, I think something's going on here, but then I sort of spaced it. I didn't really think about it a lot. And so it kind of crept up on me again. And in my last year of high school, I had this friend named Milan from Croatia, and he had some connects from Europe. Like, he knew people that were into music, and maybe one of the guys from BLeeb. And then he told me he had this friend from Austria named Baldys. And it sounded like he was describing BLeeb, saying, so I was saying I'd really like to move to Europe so I could meet a cool guy that's into this kind of music and stuff. And he's like, you don't have to do that. What if he's here already, And he started telling me about this guy named Baldys. Now, I had to explain how this kind of like got trickled throughout my my whole visionary stretch, from 1982, like when I was first introduced to him, that name was sprinkled in, Baldys Van Buren, right? And then it was brought up again by himself. And so, like, I just really need it. It's one of those things where, they plant a seed of thought and then something else triggers it later. And it's like, Baldys, it still didn't quite ring a bell. I'm not sure if I even caught on that he was hinting at BLeeb quite yet, but maybe later on it kind of hit me like, oh my God, they've been trying to tell me this all along, right? And then the next time it came up with this was in Denver a couple different times. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the really Bob Bill phrase. That term, or that that comes from my dad saying really Bob Billy, right? So and how this gets sprinkled in. So I think the last thing I brought up about, no, I was telling you guys about when I went into, like, instead of a vision, I think I went to astral travel. But before that, before I left Florida, I thought I got a hold of Bill, but I'm not sure. So this is another common problem I've had from in this stage, is like, when I look back, I'm not sure if I really got a hold of him or not, or if it was just another visionary slip. And so that's kind of what's going to happen next. So there was this kid, and I say that because he was, probably like 20 years old. I was like 20, he's like 20, we're just big kids, And I saw him get dropped off by this white Trans Am. you know, I was standing at the corner of probably like Lincoln and Alameda trying to catch the bus, and I saw him come over from like the corner of Broadway and Alameda, and he walked up and came over and started talking to me about my t-shirt because I had on a D. Coop shirt. And then he asked me if I was going to the Frontline Assembly show, and I'm like, oh, in fact, I got 2 tickets, and I don't have someone to give the other end to, so that's how we made friends. It's over, you know, if it wasn't for that free ticket, you know, because again, my dad's friend Kelly was like a music producer, and I guess he did a lot of stagehand stuff, so he just knew a lot of people, and it was real nice and sweet of him to give me 2 tickets, but if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't have invited anyone to come with me. I probably would have went alone and been a loner, so I don't know, so maybe that was a blessing in disguise, so that was a good thing. And I thought Aaron was kind of a cute guy, you know, he's a tall skinny guy. I guess I like these tall skinny guys, you know, with blonde hair, you know, so I thought he was a cute guy, you know. I wasn't really sure, like, I kind of thought he could be my next boyfriend, but you know, first of all, I thought he had pretty good taste in music, so he had a couple things going, but he kind of acted like he didn't want me to consider it, you know, like he didn't think I was good enough to be his girlfriend, you know. Like I could kind of feel it. Like he didn't come right out and say, you know, people just kind of like, you know, don't try to sit too close to me or anything, like that kind of thing. So yeah, sometimes when I wake up in the morning, I have the sniffles and I have to clear my lungs. Like I think this heater, like you hear that big noisy thing over there, it blows a lot of dust and stuff. It seems like whenever I use that. So I apologize for looking like I'm sick. I'm not. It's just, you know. Anyways, I shouldn't have to apologize either, but it's like I'm not sick. I'm just choking probably because of that big stupid heater. Anyways, I was telling you guys how like this stuff kind of gets weaved in. Like, so Aaron had this friend named Bob that wanted to meet me. He said Bob was about 29 years old, and he gave me this phone number to call. So he was staying with this guy named Bob, and I called over and talked to Bob and stuff, and Bob seemed kind of cool, and I sat there and I told him about how like I kind of think I remembered BLeeb from my visions, but I feel like, you know, people treat me like I just want to talk to a rock star or something. So I don't know if I talked it over with Aaron or something. I'm not quite sure like how much I discussed this with Aaron, you know. But Bob just, you know, he was kind of cool and friendly. He was like, oh, wow, that's far out, you know. Like, he seemed to enjoy hearing me talk about, you know. Because I told him something I'm really into is, like, the paranormal. I think it's cool how, like, I've experienced a little astral travel or prophetic dreams and stuff. And, but then I'm kind of dealing with this thing where I think I remember BLeeb from somewhere, and that's kind of why I wanted to meet him. But it's tricky because, you know, the whole social dynamic, you know, with him being the rock star and everything. And so, kind of later on, I was being told in my visions, like, you know, I was there's a few times where I've talked to BLeeb and I didn't know it, and this is one of those times, you know, where I'm not sure if I was talking to BLeeb or not, but it's one of those times where I may have been, and I'm not sure, right? So, again, I don't want to, you know, accuse him of, you know, doing something like this and lying about it. Like, I could have been having a visionary slip or something. But it's one of those things that when it all hit me, I'm like, oh my God, you know, like I think I got a hold of him in Florida. I think I got a hold of him here, and that he was going as Bob, you know. So I don't know if I've talked to Bob a couple times maybe, but I kind of felt a little bit put off. Like, you know, I almost thought maybe Bob's a little too old for me, you know, because he's like 9 years older than me. And so I wasn't really sure exactly how old BLeeb was. Like, I saw some information on him saying he was born in 1966, so he would have been 9 years older than me too. So I'm thinking that's kind of like it's within my like threshold of acceptability on age difference. I really always imagined having a partner closer to my age because my mom and dad are only 2 years apart, you know. So to me, you know, going with somebody that's like 20 years older than me is like a big age difference. And then ironically, I found out BLeeb has actually had girlfriends, a girlfriend at least, one that I know of that was a lot younger than me, so he doesn't see the age difference as a problem, apparently. So maybe he doesn't think like I do. But the point being is it's kind of funny to think that I was afraid him being 9 years older than me was too old, and then I come to find out that BLeeb is actually 19 years older than me. There was a misprint or something. Maybe he told them 1956, but then they wrote 1966. And you know, and if people want to think BLeeb is younger than he is, he's probably think, well, go right ahead and think so. But so yeah, you know, so I mean, I really, you know, actually, my dad was a music collector, and he was kind of making me a music collector. And so as part of the hobby of collecting music, you do like to find out a little bit about the guys in the band, you know, like what country are they from, or, you know, what's their age, you know, how old are they, you know, stuff like that. Like, you don't really need to know that stuff, but when you're a collector, people, you know, so like I kind of was learning to do that, and plus I read a few good band biographies and stuff, so just depends, you know, like sometimes, you know, the story of the band is always a great part of the whole, like if you're a collector, it's always a great part of the experience, you know, hearing about, like, for example, like how New Order came about and stuff like that. It's actually a very exciting story, you know, like I don't need to hear all that to enjoy their music, but it's enjoyable. So like, you know, as an aside, you know, I don't see why there's no biography for, like, you know, Skinny Puppy and Frontline Assembly, and or, you know, any of those artists, because I'm sure they've all had really interesting lives. So like, you know, I've had to like find out things about BLeeb along the way, because, you know, I'm just kind of curious, is BLeeb the same person as Billy and stuff like that. So that's the only reason I know like how old he is, or that he's been divorced or anything, or that he's had a girlfriend that's 8 years younger than me. Only because, you know, I'm looking for Billy, and I thought BLeeb and Billy were the same person. So anyways, you know, back to Bob. So Bob comes up again, and that's why I ended up making friends with this kid named Dan. And so I'm thinking that had to be towards, I'm kind of thinking that's in 1997. So like I was hanging out with Aaron in 1996, because we went to the show together and we were hanging out. In fact, I think I was jamming out the Frontline Assembly in my apartment, and Aaron came by with a few guys. You know, I kind of allowed people to just show up at my place. People didn't have to call ahead. I loved when people dropped in and paid me a visit. I was just really flexible on that. So, you know, he showed up with a few guys, and like it's like you come in, and there's like my couch, and then like those guys got behind my couch and the wall behind them, and they just stood there, and Aaron started saying, "You have a crush on a rock star," and then they were like laughing at me. And I'm like, "No, I don't." And I remember thinking one of his friends looked like Reese Fulber too. So that's another one of those weird things where I'm like, I wonder if that was one of those visionary slips, or if they really did that, or, you know, or was that somebody that just looked like Reese, or was that Reese, you know? So that's where, you know, you gotta wonder if you know, I'm delusional and stuff. But you know, that very well could have happened, and, you know, and if it was somebody that just looked like Reese, that probably make more sense too. But then Aaron moved away, you know, and then came Dan, and I made friends with Dan. I was just hanging out on the mall, you know, at 16th Street Mall, and started chatting with him, and he seemed like a cool guy, you know, like I liked him, and we made friends over ufology and psychic awareness, and he said that he was in the Navy, and in the Navy they're interested in people who are psychically inclined, and they get them to help out with you know, the UFO stuff they find, you know, stuff like that. And so, you know, the one thing that Dan didn't like about the Navy is that they're if they find any living beings with these crafts, oftentimes they put them to death, you know. So that's really I kind of feel the same way. I don't think it's fair to put these space travelers to death, you know. I don't understand it, you know, if that's what they're doing. So I'm not saying that this is happening, but if it was happening, I certainly agree with that. So we made friends over this discussion, and I think I let him stay with me a little bit too, and that's where I mentioned earlier on my story about how the term Baldys Van Vuren got weaved into my psychotic experience, or psychosis experience. Like, I just say that jokingly, because what it is, it's a trick, you know. It kind of tricked me into thinking that BLeeb and Baldys Van Vuren, it tricked me into thinking that BLeeb was living in apartment number 311, and then I got really humiliated by finding out it was incorrect. Now, this is another trick. Now, is BLeeb Baldys Van Vuren, or is BLeeb really Bob? That is the question. So, like being put on the phone with that guy that was claiming to be Bob, you know, he had a voice a lot like BLeeb's, you know. It's hard to say, I mean, because it's over the phone and everything. But coulda. And then there's Dan. Like Dan had his own apartment for a little bit, and he told me to come over because he was gonna meet me, and he wanted me to just hang out in the courtyard, and that way you know, when he pulled in, I would see him and Bob. You know, he wanted me to see this guy Bob that he knows, and he had a white Trans Am, kind of like the one that Aaron got out of, and he looked kind of like BLeeb, but he looked like older BLeeb with the darker, like when his hair was more dark and he had the undercut, you know. He didn't look like the newer BLeeb that had the lighter looking hair, like I had just seen on tour, you know. Like I didn't know Bill was blonde. I thought he had dark hair. But then same with my dad. I didn't know my dad was blonde. I thought he had brown hair, you know. So these guys are mixed blondes. His hair color changed or whatever, and that's kind of interesting. So that I had actually seen that in my visions too. Is first time I met Bill, he kind of had the mixed blonde, but then another time I met him, his hair was cut really short and it was all really dark looking, and I was kind of confused. I'm like, oh my god, you look really different. And he's like, that's not important right now. I need you to listen to me. Blah, blah, blah. Anyways, yeah, Billy was kind of like, by the way, he knew how to make me shut up and listen. That's the funny thing about him, you know, even when he was a kid in the visions. But in this instance, so one, I thought I was talking to Bob on the phone, maybe this is the same Bob. And then there's the Bob that pulled up in the Trans Am, looked like BLeeb. And I was hanging out with Dan one night, you know, I think we were having a little slumber party at his place. And he told me to please stop thinking so much. It's because he can hear it, you know, and it's hard to sleep because he keeps hearing me think. So, and then he started telling me about his friend named Bob. He's like, he's got this friend named Bob, and he's really worried about him because he has a coke sniffing habit. And then he told me, the weird thing about Bob though is he likes to shave his ass, you know. And so, then there was the time that Dan was staying with me, and he was telling me he had this friend named Baldys that came to my house, and he's the one that got into my 45 collection, right? So, it seems like, you know, I'm getting these weird hints that, like, he's been around and stuff, and, so, like, this is something that catches up with me later, like, I think in 2000, you know, it all hits me, I was like, oh my god, they've been trying to tell me all along, and there's a couple instances where I may have talked to him. In fact, Dan was trying to tell me about this friend named Bob, you know, and so, like, now later on, you know, like, I'd probably even mentioned this, like, in 98, I was going over my friend's Jason, so he also made mention that BLeeb likes to pick up, he's a sugar daddy, and he goes down to Cheeseman Park to pick up young guys. Well, that would have been Dan. That's like, oh, well, that explains Dan then, you know, that's why. So when Bill's in cognito, he goes as Bob. Now, so this is the only thing I can really think of that pertains to really Bob Billy, you know, so I'm just thinking there's just a funny coincidence and so on and so forth. But it kind of makes me wonder because now much later, so I had this friend named Kim, and she and I made friends over, like, in the talk, you know, we like to talk about ufology and all the psychic awareness. Of course, I had to tell her this whole story about BLeeb. Like, I think this is so fascinating, and I think she heard me out on much of it. And then I showed her this picture. So I'm going to share this picture with you guys on this magazine. So I showed this to her, anyways, and she said, "Hey, I think I know that guy from somewhere." She said his name is Bob, and she met him, I don't know, maybe between the years of like 2002 and 2004, and that she would see him at these parties, like kind of like, there's kind of like the artist scene, you know, like they have their little parties, and they get together, and the kind of people that go to these parties, they're kind of like the reason she was able to get into this, she was kind of transsexual or transgender, and she was going through a sex change, so she was going as a guy, and she was kind of part of the cool hip gay community. So she's really a cool person, and she was able to kind of like give me a lot of insight on this whole kind of type of community. And so anyway, she was telling me about Bob really seemed to enjoy listening to her stories about the UFOs and stuff. You know, he seemed like a really cool and friendly person, and but he was sniffing a lot of coke, you know, so that goes back to Dan saying, you know, his friend Bob does cocaine, and you know, and a couple of people have tried. I think at least one or two people have tried to tell me that BLeeb does coke. So I'm not saying he does, but I don't know that for a fact. But it is very common and typical in the music scene for people to get involved with those type of substances because they're available and people are, you know, come over and have some. Or like the people that are traveling with bands and stuff. Like I had the chance to go work at a big show in Denver. I can't remember if it was like 2003, 2004, but it was like Metallica and all these guys, and I worked all day long, and at the end of the night I was helping them, and I'd never done this kind of work before, but I can tell like that's hard work, and you're up at odd hours, and you know whether you're ready to go to bed or not, you got to get your ass moving, and so like I was pulling those big long cords they call snakes, and boy, the next day I was pooping, and I could tell a lot of those crew members were probably on something, so just saying, like, you know, it's common knowledge that people who tour with bands and stuff end up trying to do stuff like that because it helps you to stay awake. But then, so I'm not saying he does it, but here's what people are telling me. So, you know, there was something, it turned into a conflict with me, and I kind of apologize for, you know, mentioning this stuff. It's just stuff that people have told me, you know, and I was kind of mentioning it to you know, because I was made the like I was saying earlier on, I made the mistake of going online and trying to talk about this stuff when people started coming down on me and telling me to go see a shrink. I'm like, screw you guys, those guys are a bunch of coke sniffing fashion snobs, you know. Like I just wanted to hit back with the coke sniffing fashion snob thing, because I feel like those are the people that are ruining the whole, like you know, like I was talking about the Cultural Revolution. It seems like we're kind of losing our point and purpose, you know, and there's nothing but a bunch of goddamn fashion coke sniffing fashion snobs wrecking everything. So, you know, so I don't mean to say anything that's not true. I'm just saying, you know, this friend of mine said that BLeeb and Bob might be the same person. Now there could have been a person that looks just like BLeeb named Bob, you know. That might have been all it was. So, like, you know, I'm not saying, you know, BLeeb went out to a party and told everyone his name was Bob, you know, so he could kind of sniff coke incognito or anything. But like, it's just weird how all this information kind of gets laced together. And you know, like the Baldys Van Veer thing goes back to 1982. Then, like in my last year of high school, then like a magazine article, this other friend, blah blah blah. And the next thing you know, I see this person's name on a mailbox, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you know, somebody told me BLeeb lives upstairs, and I've also been told that his name is also Baldys Van Veer, but now I'm being told his name is also Bob. So, you know, again, you know, BLeeb could easily be a stage name. And like if you Google it, like you get this this army general. There's like only like one person in the world named BLeeb, and it's an army general from the Nazi army. Who he was, so he was an Austrian man too, and but he was like a good Nazi. And I think the thing that made him special is he didn't support the bad things the Nazis were doing. So it make a great stage name. It's like, hey, I'm a Nazi, but I'm a good Nazi. I don't know. I'm not saying that either, but it would make a great stage name, but like that doesn't necessarily mean the Baldys Van Veeren part's correct or anything else. I mean, and not only that, but his wife never changed her name to Leeb either, right? So she seems to keep her maiden name. So like that's where I feel like it's also to protect Bill's, you know, proper name. If he just likes to use a pen name instead, that's understandable, so that way, you know, he can have more privacy. It's not a bad plan. So anyways, really Bob Bill, really Bob Billy, don't you think it's kind of silly, all these stories and everything? Really Bob Bill, really Bob Billy, bum ba dum boom. Anyways, yeah, I realize, you know, it almost seems silly, but if I could kind of organize the whole experience, it would make a great horror story of sorts where, you know, somebody's being driven crazy in such a way that like no one else can see exactly how it's being done. And that's part of the torture is when you're trying to share something that you know is happening and that is your truth, and other people are trying to convince you that it's really only your imagination. There's a whole ton of horror stories that are based on an exact same problem. So you guys, have a fun day, and hopefully not experiencing any kind of mental torture just like this. So yeah, we could all make our life better if we could just take the mental torture out of the picture and just give everyone positive support. Take care. Have a good day. I'll talk to you soon.